It was pouring rain outside. I stood by the window of my 42nd floor penthouse office, looking down at the city. From up here, the usual chaos felt completely silent, like a whole different world, one I used to be a part of. In my right hand, I held a cream-colored piece of paper, a resume. It was printed on incredibly expensive, heavy cardstock, a desperate and pathetic attempt to look professional. I ran my thumb over the name at the very top of the page. It was printed in bold, arrogant letters. Marcus Vance, my older brother, the golden child of our family. 10 years ago, he was the absolute center of my parents' universe. Their flawless, precious diamond, a boy who could do no wrong. 10 years ago, those same parents looked me dead in the eye without a single ounce of shame or regret and told me that my college fund, the money I had bled for, the money my grandfather had left for my future, was being drained to fund Marcus's revolutionary new startup app. They didn't ask me. They just robbed me of what was rightfully mine. And today, a decade later, Marcus's arrogant little startup was nothing but a pile of ashes and legal notices. My parents had drowned themselves in massive debt, all to protect his fragile, hollow ego. And Marcus? Right at this very moment, Marcus was sitting down in the lobby of my company, waiting to interview for a mid-level sales position. He was begging for a lifeline, and he didn't have the slightest clue that the CEO of the multi-million-dollar logistics firm he was waiting to see was none other than the little brother he had thrown out like trash 10 years ago. I adjusted the cuffs of my crisp white shirt and smoothed out my navy blue blazer. I checked the time on my wrist. The dark brown leather of my expensive watch matched my shoes perfectly. I took a deep breath. It was time for the interview. But to truly understand the sheer satisfaction of this moment, this ultimate revenge, you have to go back a bit. I need to tell you the real truth about the Vance family, because betrayal doesn't just happen overnight. It's a sweet poison, one your own family feeds you drop by drop from the time you're a kid. Growing up, two entirely different worlds existed under our roof. One world belonged to Marcus, filled with nothing but spotlight, applause, and endless money. The other was mine, lost somewhere deep in the shadows of his reflection. Marcus was 3 years older than me. He was tall, charming, and an absolute smooth talker. He was the star of the high school, a guy who could fool anyone with just a smile. My parents, Richard and Helen, didn't just love him, they worshipped him. To them, Marcus wasn't just a son, he was a trophy. They were utterly convinced that he was going to rule the world. And me? I was the invisible ghost of the house. I was quiet. I preferred books over parties. When Marcus turned 16, he was gifted a brand new, shiny sports car, while I was handed the keys to a rusted 15-year-old beater that stalled out every 3 miles. When Marcus needed a $500 designer suit for prom, my mother swiped her credit card without blinking an eye. But when I needed just $40 for a high school science project, I got a lecture about how money doesn't grow on trees and how I needed to learn the value of hard work. So I worked hard. At 15, I started working weekends at a local hardware store. I swept floors, hauled heavy bags of cement, and sweat from dawn until dusk. I didn't mind the grueling labor. I didn't even mind being ignored at home. Because I had a secret. I had a plan. My grandfather, he was the only person in the family who saw through the drama. He was a strict, fiercely grounded man who had built his entire life from scratch. I remember I was 16. We were sitting on the porch one evening, and he said something to me that would eventually save my life. He said, "David, your parents are building a glass castle for Marcus, and one day it's going to shatter. Marcus is weak on the inside, but you have the calluses of hard work on your hands." Before he passed away, Grandpa set up a trust fund. It wasn't a massive fortune, but it was $80,000, and the conditions of the will were crystal clear. That money was strictly and exclusively for my college tuition. Not a single red cent could go to Marcus or my parents. That money was my ticket to freedom. When Grandpa died, my parents were furious. They tried to seize the money using lawyers, arguing that Marcus needed it more for his business ideas. But the lawyers threw them out. The money was mine, just waiting for me to turn 18. I felt safe. I thought my future was untouchable. But greed is blind. And my parents were willing to set my entire world on fire just to keep Marcus's fake prestige alive. That nightmare happened on a cold October night. I was exactly a month away from my 18th birthday. I was sitting in my room, filling out college applications. I was thrilled. For the first time, I felt like I was finally about to escape that shadowy life. Just then, my mom called me down for dinner. I walked down the stairs. I figured it would be the usual quiet dinner, with Marcus bragging about some fake accomplishment. But the dining table was completely empty. There was no food. On one side of the table, my parents sat with their arms crossed. Marcus sat at the head of the table, a smug, arrogant smirk on his face, swirling a glass of sparkling cider in his hand. My stomach tied into a sickening knot. The silence in the room was heavy and terrifying. "Sit down, David," my father, Richard, said. I pulled out a chair and sat down. "Marcus has hit a massive milestone," my mother, Helen, started. "He's finalized the business plan for his new tech startup. It's an app, David. It's going to completely revolutionize the market. Major investors are already lining up." "That's great," I said cautiously. "Congratulations." Marcus flashed that typical fake smile of his. "Thanks, little bro. Everything is moving so fast. Honestly, so fast that I need immediate capital to file the patents and get the prototype ready before the investors come in." My father cleared his throat. He refused to look me in the eye. "And, as a family, David, we need to take advantage of this huge opportunity. We've taken out a second mortgage on the house to give Marcus his initial funding." I was stunned. "You mortgaged the house? For an app that hasn't even been built yet?" "It's not just the house, David," my mother interrupted. "We need a little more cash to properly support Marcus. And since you're still so young and have plenty of time to figure your life out, we've decided to withdraw your college fund and invest it into Marcus's company. Consider it a family investment." My mother's words dropped on that dining table like a bomb. It felt like all the air had been violently punched out of my lungs. The room started spinning. I looked at my dad, hoping he would say something, hoping he would defend me. But he just avoided my gaze, staring blankly at his empty plate. Then I looked at Marcus. There was absolutely no remorse or shame on his face. Just that smug, arrogant grin, like he had just won a war and was putting me in my place. "You know," my voice was shaking, but I wasn't crying. "Grandpa left that $80,000 specifically for my education. It's in my name. I worked day and night at that hardware store just so I could cover the rest of the tuition." "Technically," my mother said, her voice ice cold, "until you turn 21, we are your legal guardians, and we've decided that this is what's best for the family. You can always go to a community college or take out a heavy student loan. This is a massive opportunity for Marcus. You wouldn't want to stand in the way of your own brother's success, would you, David?" Marcus took a sip of his sparkling cider and chuckled. "Don't take it so hard, little bro. Once my company goes public, I'll buy you a brand new car." In that one moment, in that dead silent, horrifying second, the veil was ripped from my eyes forever. I didn't scream. I didn't smash any plates. I didn't make a scene. I knew that even if I cried or begged, it wouldn't make a damn bit of difference to them, because I wasn't sitting among family. I was trapped between two blind investors and a con artist. There was no place for me in that house, and honestly, there probably never was. I quietly got up from my chair. I looked Marcus dead in the eyes. "I hope your app works out," I said, my voice deadpan and rigid. I walked up the stairs to my room. I pulled out an old duffel bag. I packed a few clothes, my favorite books, and the $2,000 I'd saved up, sweating at that hardware store. I turned off the light in my room, and without telling a soul, without a single goodbye, I walked out the front door. The October air was bitterly cold that night, but there was a fire burning inside me, a fire that no winter in the world could put out. The next few years were the most painful, yet the most valuable years of my life. I had left home, but I hadn't left my education, or my dreams behind. While Marcus was using my money to rent a flashy glass-walled office downtown, throwing expensive parties for his investors and flaunting his CEO title, I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor in a damp, stinking garage on the outskirts of the city. I worked 14 hours a day, waking up at 4 in the morning to load heavy freight onto trucks, waiting tables at a diner in the afternoon, and spending my nights holed up in the public library. Since my college fund was robbed, that public library became my university. I didn't want to get rich overnight. I didn't believe in shortcuts like Marcus did. I learned the principles of building true generational wealth from those old library books. I read Napoleon Hill. I studied Warren Buffett's strategies. I learned the sheer, unstoppable power of compounding. I realized that real wealth isn't some flashy overnight tech app. Wealth is what happens when small, correct daily habits and relentless hard work slowly compound into a mountain that nobody can move. At 22, while guys my age were out partying at clubs, I scraped together every single penny I had and bought an old secondhand delivery box truck. I didn't build an app. I built a service. I drove that truck myself. I took on the grueling, boring delivery contracts that the big corporate fleets refused to touch. I was never late, and I poured 90% of every dollar I made right back into the business. My mindset was the exact opposite of Marcus's. He wanted to look rich, and I wanted to actually be rich. I don't even know when my one beat-up truck turned into three, or when those three turned into an entire regional fleet. My company, Apex Freight Solutions, was quietly devouring the market. For 7 years, I never looked back. I never called my parents. I had no idea what was going on with them. But the business world is incredibly small, and bad news spreads like wildfire. At the end of my 7th year, I was sitting in the corner office of my new headquarters. I had just landed a multi-million-dollar logistics contract with the biggest retail chain in the country. I was standing at the absolute peak of my success. That's when I got a phone call from an old acquaintance. Marcus's app, Vanguard Tech, the one he was so ridiculously arrogant about, had completely crashed and burned. The software was full of bugs, and there was zero market demand for it. The investors had pulled all their funding. Marcus's company was dead and the doors were padlocked. But the story didn't end there. To save Marcus's fragile ego and keep up appearances, my parents had mortgaged everything, their savings, their retirement accounts, and even the deed to the house. "David," the voice on the phone said, "the bank foreclosed on your parents' house. They are completely bankrupt. They were evicted from that luxury estate and had to move into a tiny, run-down apartment on the bad side of town. At their age, they're working at a grocery store just to keep the lights on." I hung up the phone. I didn't smile. I didn't feel like celebrating. But there was a strange, deep sense of peace in my eyes. The wheel of time had come full circle. Karma had done its job. But I had no idea that the real climax was still waiting for me. I didn't know that exactly 3 days after that phone call, my arrogant brother Marcus, the guy who thought he was the king of the world, was going to walk into the very 42-story building I owned, begging for a job. Sarah, my head of HR, brought a resume to me during our morning briefing. "David, a candidate just showed up for the regional sales director position. His name is Marcus Vance. Is he by any chance related to you?" I stared at that piece of paper for a long time. "Yeah," I said, my voice dead calm. "He's my older brother. I'll be conducting this interview myself." Sarah looked a little surprised, but nodded. "He's waiting down in the lobby. Should I send him up to your office?" "No," I replied without blinking. "Let him wait. A full 45 minutes. Let him soak in the atmosphere of this building and let the nerves build up." And now, those 45 minutes were up. I sat back in my heavy leather chair. I pressed the button on my intercom. "Sarah, send him in." Seconds later, the heavy glass doors of my office swung open. Marcus walked in. And looking at him for a split second, I couldn't believe my eyes. This wasn't the guy I had left behind 10 years ago. That broad-shouldered, cocky, radiant golden boy was completely gone. In his place stood a tired, defeated, slightly hunched-over man. He was wearing an incredibly cheap, ill-fitting gray suit that looked like it was a decade old. His hair was thinning. There was a pathetic, fearful look in his eyes. The moment he walked in, he started staring at my massive, luxurious office. The expensive paintings, the Italian marble, the panoramic view of the entire city skyline, he was completely intimidated. He didn't even look directly at me. He was so terrified by the sheer status of the room that he kept his eyes glued to the floor. "Mr. CEO, thank you so much for your valuable time," Marcus started. There was none of that old arrogance in his voice. It was just pure begging. He walked closer to my desk, extending his hand. "I know you're an incredibly busy man. And right then, he lifted his head. His eyes met mine. His outstretched hand froze dead in the air. I leaned back in my chair, rested my elbows on the armrests, and steepled my fingers together. I just stared at him, absolutely silent, my face totally void of expression. All the color instantly drained from Marcus's face. It looked like someone had siphoned every drop of blood out of his body. His jaw dropped open, but no sound came out. He started blinking frantically, like his brain literally couldn't process what he was looking at. "Hello, Marcus," I said. My voice was smooth, but it carried a weight that completely silenced the room. "Have a seat." He stumbled backward. His leg hit the guest chair and he collapsed heavily into it. He was looking at me like he had just seen a ghost. "David," he whispered. His voice was shaking and his throat was bone dry. "David, are you?" "Yes, I am the founder and CEO of Apex Freight Solutions," I said, flipping open his resume on my desk. "I see you've applied for the regional sales director position." "I don't understand," Marcus began to stammer, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You own this company? This whole building? That entire fleet of trucks? How? When I saw you last, you were doing manual labor at a hardware store?" "I learned a lot about compounding, Marcus," I said, leaning forward slightly. "While you were blowing my college fund on Porsches and throwing parties to feed your fake ego, I was buying delivery trucks. I built a foundation from the dirt up, and you? You built a house of cards, and a slight breeze blew it all down." Marcus swallowed hard. It was finally hitting him just how deep of a hole he was in. He was a broke, desperate man, begging for a job from the exact same billionaire brother that he and his parents had robbed and thrown onto the streets. "David, listen to me." Marcus suddenly changed his tune. He tried to force a sickeningly sweet fake smile onto his face. He leaned in. "Man, it's been such a long time, huh? I always knew you were destined for greatness. Hey, we're family, right? This is amazing. If you're the CEO, then why do we even need an interview? The two of us, we can run this place together." "Shut your mouth." I said it quietly, but the words cracked across his face like a whip. Marcus's fake smile vanished instantly. "We are not family, Marcus," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "We stopped being family the night you and our parents conspired to steal $80,000 from an 18-year-old kid just so you could play businessman." Marcus squirmed. "David, come on, man. We were just kids back then. That was Mom and Dad's call, not mine. And they've paid a brutal price for it. Do you have any idea what they're going through? Their house was foreclosed on. They're living in a dump. They're working at a grocery store in their old age. You have all this money, and you haven't checked on them once?" A slow, ice-cold smile crept onto my lips. This was the ultimate victory. A decade in the making. "Why on earth would I check on them?" I asked, my tone completely flat. "They made an investment. They bet their house, their retirement, and my entire future on their golden child. I am simply respecting their brilliant financial decision." There was genuine terror in Marcus's eyes now. "I need this job, David. I'm drowning here. I have 50 grand in credit card debt. My landlord is evicting me this Friday. You have to give me this job. I'll do anything. I'll start at the very bottom." I picked up his resume. I didn't tear it up. I didn't yell or scream. I just held the cheap paper up in the air. "This resume is a blatant lie, Marcus," I said, entirely professional. "You claim you were the CEO of Vanguard Tech for 4 years. That wasn't a company. That was a black hole that swallowed my money and our parents' house. You have zero actual sales experience. You don't know the first thing about logistics. Forget being a director. You aren't even qualified to work in the mailroom of my company. Please, Marcus begged. A tear spilled out of his eye. The arrogant golden boy was actually crying. I'm your brother. My brother died 10 years ago, I said, dropping his resume straight into the trash can next to my desk. The man sitting in front of me is nothing more than a rejected candidate. I hit the intercom button. Sarah, the interview is over. Send security up to escort Mr. Vance out of the building. Marcus stood up. His face was flushed crimson with shame and pure rage. You arrogant bastard, he hissed, his hands physically shaking. You think you're better than me just because you got lucky? I slowly stood up from my chair. I buttoned my blazer, walked around to the front of the desk, and stood right in his face. He was taller than me, but in that moment, he looked smaller than an ant. I wasn't lucky, Marcus, I whispered softly. I was smart. Now get the hell out of my building. 2 security guards were already standing at the door. Marcus looked at them and then back at me. All the fight had completely drained out of him. He lowered his head and walked out with the guards. I watched him leave. I walked back over to the window and stared out at the rain. I felt like a massive, crushing weight had finally been lifted off my chest. But the story wasn't quite over. Barely 2 hours had passed since I threw Marcus out when the light on my intercom started flashing again. David! Sarah's voice sounded panicked. There's an elderly couple down in the lobby. They claim to be your parents, and they are screaming at security, demanding their share of the company. I closed my eyes. The final and biggest pieces of the chessboard were finally in play. Send them up with security, Sarah, I said calmly, and have them wait outside my office. I got up from my desk and went to stand by the window once again. I felt absolutely no anger or hatred inside me. To hate someone, you actually need a relationship with them. And I had absolutely no relationship with these people. A few minutes later, the door to my office opened. Richard and Helen walked in. The last 10 years had not been kind to them. They looked incredibly old, exhausted, and broken. My mother, who used to never step outside without head-to-toe designer labels, was wearing a cheap, faded cardigan. My father's shoulders were completely slumped. That old, arrogant pride was nowhere to be seen on their faces. All that was left was a starving, greedy desperation. They were just as intimidated by the sheer wealth of the room as Marcus had been earlier. David, my boy, my mother, Helen, stepped forward, forcing fake tears and opening her arms to hug me. I didn't move a single inch. I just held my hand up, a crystal clear signal for her to keep her distance. Helen stopped dead in her tracks. Her fake tears dried up instantly. What do you want? I asked, keeping my voice in a strictly business tone. Is that any way to speak to your parents? My father, Richard, tried to assert his old authority, but his voice completely lacked conviction. Marcus just came to us. He was sobbing, David. You refused to give him a job? He is your own flesh and blood. And you become this massive success, build this huge company, and you don't even pick up the phone to call us? We are your parents. I leaned against the edge of my desk, and a cold smile touched my lips. 10 years ago, I said slowly, enunciating every single word. When I packed a tiny bag at 18 and walked out that front door in the middle of the night, did you stop me? Did you ever make a single phone call just to see if I was even alive? Pin drop silence filled the room. Helen looked away. We didn't have a choice, David, Helen stammered. Marcus's business was going under. We were drowning in debt. We lost absolutely everything, David. Today we're living in a filthy apartment, getting cursed out by customers while working at a grocery store. Half the time, we don't even have money for food. And you are sitting in this palace playing with millions. As a son, you have a duty to us. My duty? I let out a dark chuckle, the kind of laugh that could send a chill down anyone's spine. When did you ever treat me like a son, Helen? I was just a spare tire, a backup plan. Richard stepped forward, a disgusting greed lighting up his eyes. Look, David, what happened, happened. We can't change the past, but whatever empire you've built here, our blood is still in it. We brought you into this world. We raised you. You owe us a stake in this company, or at the very least, a partnership for Marcus. We are family, and family shares the profits. Their greed absolutely sickened me. They didn't come here to apologize. They came here treating me like I was their property. They actually thought they could play on my emotions and rob me all over again. I stood up straight. That cold smile completely vanished from my face. You gave birth to me, and for that, I am grateful, I said, my voice completely flat. But you didn't raise me. The streets raised me. Those graveyard shifts, loading bags of cement onto trucks, raised me. That public library where I used to shiver in the cold while reading books, raised me. What did you give me? You stole my inheritance, my $80,000 from Grandpa, right in front of my face. That wasn't stealing, Richard yelled. That was a business decision. Exactly, I said, pointing my finger dead at him. It was a business decision. And today my decision is strictly a business decision too. I opened the drawer of my desk. A sudden spark of hope lit up in Helen and Richard's eyes. They thought I was going to pull out a checkbook. They genuinely believed their emotional blackmail had worked, and I was about to hand them a massive payout. I pulled a crisp white envelope out of the drawer. It was premium quality stationery. I slid the envelope across the desk right toward Helen. What is this? Helen asked, eyeing the envelope with naked greed. This is my final settlement for you and for Marcus, I said, keeping my tone perfectly steady. Take it and get the hell out of my building. If you or Marcus ever come within 100 yards of my company again, my lawyers will hit you with a harassment suit, and I will personally see to it that you both go to jail. Richard glared at me furiously, but the burning greed to know what was inside that envelope overpowered his anger. His hands were shaking as he picked it up. You are going to deeply regret this one day, David, Helen cursed at me. Your greed will destroy you. Greed has already destroyed you, Mrs. Vance, I replied. Now get out. They didn't even look back. Clutching that envelope tightly to their chests, they walked out the door with the security guards. They were absolutely convinced that the envelope held a check for at least a few $100,000, enough to instantly fix their lives and Marcus's. But they had no idea what was actually inside that envelope. When Richard and Helen walked out of that 42-story glass skyscraper, it was still pouring rain in the city. I couldn't see them from my window up here, but I could picture it perfectly. I could imagine them standing under some bus stop shelter, frantically tearing open that envelope with their greedy, trembling hands. They fully expected their pathetic emotional act to have melted my heart, hoping for a fat check to get their lives and Marcus's back on track. But there was no $1,000,000 check inside that envelope. There was only a single, crisp $1 bill, and wrapped around that $1 bill was a tiny white note with just one line written in my handwriting. My seed funding. Consider it a family investment. I know for a fact the ground must have completely dropped out from under them when they read that note. That $1 showed them exactly what they were worth. 10 years ago, they stole my future to bet on an arrogant fool. And today, with a single dollar, I paid their debt back with interest. They never came back. They never dared to even look in the direction of my company again. It's been over a year since that day. Apex Freight isn't just a regional fleet anymore. We've officially broken into the international market. I am incredibly happy with my life. I am damn proud of the empire I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. My parents are still rotting in that same cheap apartment, carrying the crushing weight of mistakes they can never undo. And my brother, Marcus, the shining golden boy of the family, the CEO who used to drive a Porsche. Last month, one of my managers mentioned that Marcus is now working the drive-through window at a fast food joint on the other side of town. He's bagging burgers and fries for minimum wage. All his arrogance, all that fake pride, and his massive ego shattered into a million pieces in the blink of an eye. Some people think revenge requires making a lot of noise. They think you have to scream, fight, or ruin someone's life to get justice, but they're dead wrong. The most lethal and brilliant revenge in the world is completely silent. It just quietly does the work. You keep your head down, you grind, and one day you make your success so massive that the very people who treated you like trash are forced to beg just to reach your shadow. They played their hand, and I played mine. The game was over. We learn a few crucial lessons from this story. First, true wealth is built through relentless hard work, not shortcuts. The shine of fake success fades fast, but a foundation laid with sweat and compounding growth will never crumble. Second, walking away from toxic relationships is your right to freedom. When your own parents steal what's rightfully yours, cutting them off isn't selfish, it's self-respect. Third, the wheel of karma always turns. The people trying to crush you today, assuming you're weak, will be forced to bow their heads to your success tomorrow. And finally, the greatest revenge in the world is massive success. Don't waste your time fighting the people who betrayed you. Spend your time elevating yourself so high that they actually ache just looking up at you.